I think that I credit you and your book to this project that I'm running now with legend fiction, because
Oh,
that sense of cultivating the sacred look, um, it gave me a handle on an idea that I've been wanting or just trying to work with for like 10 years, and then it just came in a flash like one night. And it's like, oh, this is the needed approach. Is we need fiction that cultivates the sacred look too,
right.
especially when it comes to fantasy and sci-fi, because we have
Yes.
no. I it's been so frustrating for 10 years watching the Catholic publishing space and like the fear how to approach or tackle that topic. And I'm a dork. That's the only I love those two genres over and above all. And now, you know, again, sort of following that
Right.
understanding of what mysticism is, my appreciation for those two genres in particular has now, is now a lot deeper. So,
And well, thank you. I'm glad that this has helped people to reflect deeper. That's the whole point of the book. I mean, it
mm-hmm.
was really to skim the surface,
Yeah.
to help us reflect more on this, in engaging with the culture in this way.
Mm-hmm. Hey everyone, welcome to the Legend Fiction Show. I am so happy to be joined today by Sister Nancy Usselmann from the Daughters of St. Paul. Hi, sister, how are you?
Great. How are you doing, Dominic?
I'm doing well. We love it whenever we can get cool religious on our show. And we've had a couple. And so I think also from Pauline Books and Media. And now we've got somebody who's published a book. Well, you've published nonfiction, they've probably published fiction, but
Yes.
you wrote a book a couple of years back called A Sacred Look, Becoming Cultural Mystics. It's a theology of popular culture. And I recently reread it and I enjoyed it so much and put just so many different highlights, which are all available on my Goodreads if anybody wants to see my review. But I loved what you did in this book. And I'm going to turn it over to you in a second to talk about it because it is your passion project. But what is so cool about this book is you outline a very simple central idea, and then you go and spend, I don't know, 12, 20 chapters taking different parts of popular media, movies, and so on. And the number of examples of movies you've seen, of music you've listened to really explain your central idea and why it's so important for every average Christian and Catholic today, but in
Yes.
particular for our community, for being
Yeah.
people who love writing, and therefore you should love watching lots and lots of movies. This sense of being a cultural mystic and cultivating a sacred look. Can you share with us a little bit about that and why that's important to you?
Well, it's important to not um, diss everything in the culture. Now, I want to start out saying that I recognize that not everything is good in the culture, in the popular media culture. There is a lot of evil present there, and we can recognize that, and absolutely. But however, in a lot of the stories of the culture, and there are many ideologies that get present there, and we see it a lot growing, especially among children's television and children's
Mm-hmm.
programming.
Yeah.
But if we look at many of the stories of the culture, so in film and television, in pop music and games, it's like, what is it really talking about regarding the human person? And it's interesting, when I was writing this book, I really wanted to reflect a lot on a Christian anthropology. How do we understand the human person and the needs and desires of humanity?
Mm-hmm.
And where do we see that portrayed? Sometimes we can't quite articulate that in words. Like, we don't want to talk about, like, oh, I'm seeking purpose and meaning in life. That's not the first thing we talk about in conversation with somebody, but it does appear in the art
Mm-hmm.
of culture. And art purposely does try to reach down deep into the human yearnings and desires. So if we really look at those stories,
Mm-hmm.
and this is why I like sci-fi and superhero stories and all of that too, because
Yep.
I think they do it kind of more explicitly than some other films.
Mm-hmm.
But they're always seeking something more, either that desire for communion, for intimacy, for love, for purpose, for meaning in life, for um, connection with others. We're human beings who desire and are made for connection with others. And I think a lot of times we may, in our very individualistic society, may tend to withdraw. And yet you see in these stories the need for working together, the need for others, the need
Mm-hmm.
for a community.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we have to start there. That's our starting point for really reflecting deeply on the culture and giving it
Mhm.
a sacred view, like
Yeah.
an eyes that are deeply reflective, connecting with the Lord, always in that intimacy with the Lord, but then bringing that to the culture that we experience and that we live every day ourselves, whether we watch a lot of movies or television or not, we're
Mhm.
imbued with it. It's
Yeah.
in the
Yeah.
culture.
Like I was saying right before we hit the record, this book and your um, how you've spoken about this it just moved me. Like 2 years ago, I think I had you over on Smart Catholics and we chatted about this for about 15 minutes and so on, and that it sank deep and it just got me thinking for the last 2 years. And legend fiction is and this community is kind of a fruit of some of that reflection, this sense that we can't run around obsessing over everything that's wrong, but we need to be more productive and proactive about celebrating what is right and then using that to bridge conversation. But there was a point that you left me with last time that it just turned me around. It gave me an amazing amount of hope, where you said that a lot of a lot of modern culture is not dragging the masses around and just feeding them and sort of keeping them repressed and so on. You said, no, the Holy Spirit is actually moving people to love and want certain themes. And then media is responding to that in general. I mean, there's
Right.
always individual movies and it's all a messy situation. But if you step back again, cultivating the sacred look, what is God doing in a big sense? Can you speak again to some of that?
Um, sure. I mean, the more I get to know people, especially in Hollywood and those who work within the entertainment industry, I realize there's so many faith-filled people who are really trying to communicate really good stories,
Mm-hmm.
stories that really challenges us as human beings to be the best version of ourselves. And I think there's so much out there that's really struggling. And when there seems to be the opposite, getting the upper hand, it's like that's when these people rise up and start creating these really good stories
Mm-hmm.
that challenge us to think and to look and reflect more deeply. And I mean, even though granted, like the series The Chosen is a religious series, a story about Jesus, right? But the fact is, it came out of that culture. It came out of the entertainment industry culture.
Mm-hmm.
Dallas Jenkins himself was working in Hollywood, but he realized his ideas for it were not getting noticed uh, in the culture. And so he's like, well, let me try something myself. Let me
Mm-hmm.
try something new.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how it came to be The Chosen. So it's actually coming as a fruit of the industry itself. But so I think there's a demand for stories
Mm-hmm.
that challenge us to think deeply, to that challenge us to uplift humanity, to
Mm-hmm.
first of all respect human dignity, but secondly to uplift human beings. We want to be inspired. We
Mm-hmm.
want to be challenged, and we want to be to think deeply about why are we even here on this earth, right?
Right.
There's
Right.
something more. There's always
Mhm.
something more we're yearning for, and we're yearning ultimately for God.
Yeah.
And so much in the culture does that, and I think we're seeing stories that are coming out that
Mhm.
do that. I mean, you could look at the superhero stories, all of them. Yeah, some of them are dark. Some of them are dealing with their own problems of their own humanity, because after all, superheroes are human beings with
Mhm.
superhuman powers, but they struggle with their own humanity. So in one way we can recognize the struggle, we can
Mhm.
recognize the challenge that we too are trying to live through, and trying to become better human beings.
Yeah.
So I think so much of the stories really pull that out of us. And
Mhm.
yeah, some may not be to our liking, but others may get us to think a little deeper than perhaps we would have otherwise.
Yeah. You've got this great little line: "To be fully human is to be heroic," and I thought
Yeah.
that was great. You've got this lovely little thing that I highlighted. You said, "I believe our call is to be cultural mystics.
Mhm.
That is, the popular culture that pervades our lives. We're not to fight against it, point out everything that is evil in it, or condemn it. That's the easy thing to do. Instead, we're to be the mystics who look at the world with love and contemplate the deep underlying desires, longings, needs, and struggles. present there in order to offer the world a message of hope, truth, beauty, and goodness.
Well, after all, we have the answer to all of humanity's longings in
Mm-hmm.
our faith in Jesus Christ, right? He is the answer to all of humanity's yearnings and desires.
Mm-hmm.
And honestly, when we can look at the culture and the stories of the culture reflectively and with a mystical sense, it also helps us as creators of the media to be more effective in
Mm-hmm.
our storytelling.
Yeah.
Because we're seeing what's really catching people's attention.
Mm-hmm.
And then how can we incorporate maybe a really good, not necessarily have to have a Christian or a Catholic story, but a story with Catholic values? And maybe by looking at what the stories of the culture are telling us and what makes them attractive, we can pull those out and help us to create our own stories. We don't want to push a message in our
Mm-hmm.
storytelling. We want to tell a really good story that inspires and transforms people.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful.
And that's what we can do. That's what we can do as creators.
Well, it's the call of creators. I want to ask you about the sacramental imagination in a moment, but the we should probably pause and sidebar on what mysticism is. And I think a lot of people don't actually know what it is in the context that they have. I don't know. It might be on TikTok talking about New Age or something, and so a lot of it gets
Right.
I don't know, misapplied or described wrong. But Christianity, especially, I mean, all ancient cultures do, but Christianity has a very deep and rich mystical tradition. Can you speak a little bit to what mysticism is?
Sure. Well, generally, mysticism is really an encounter of the divine that transforms us. And we have, as a Christian, it's an encounter with the divine in Jesus Christ that changes us, that we can no longer look at the world in the same way once we have that transformative encounter with Christ. We can't communicate the same way. We can't encounter other people the same way because with that vision of Christ has put on a whole new perspective on our lives.
Yeah.
So when we truly encounter God and we are transformed by him, it's a mystical, and we have a mystical encounter. It's a mystical sense, and we have then this mystical vision then that we give to the world. Um, so many people talk about what mysticism, and often, in the culture, it thinks of like crystals and things, and often that are very demonic, quite honestly, the sense of mysticism, or it's just this mysticism that remains a naturalism. It means it can't envision a life beyond the grave. It's just very much in the here and now. And so much of the mysticism that's talked about in the culture remains there. It feeds a secular humanism, basically, that the human beings were the center of the universe and there's nothing else. A Christian mysticism, obviously seeing a Trinitarian God, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, encountering that relationship with the Trinity is what changes us and transforms us. When we're truly in that communicative relationship with the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, we're changed, we're transformed, we enter into that relationship of love. And when we're transformed in that love relationship with God, then our whole life becomes a communication of that love. So this is really communications theology. That's where I'm in the sense of mysticism is bringing us into a communication theology, how we're to be in that mystical encounter with God, but then to go forth and communicate that love to the world, really to be missionary disciples. But we do that within a media culture and within the art of popular culture. And I think being mystics today, we really have to look at that cultural understanding, looking at the art of the culture to help us be reflective on what is humanity most yearning for now. And because we have to answer the needs of people today, not people of 100 years ago, 20 years ago, but now, right now. And our storytelling can be that transformative encounter with the Trinitarian God. So,
If you, I want to ask about the sacred look, because that ties into kind of what we're doing here and what you just said. How do I say, when you do encounter somebody who is a mystic or has had, how do I say this? When mystics go to talk about these realities that they are experiencing and so on, they invariably can't rely on sensory experience, because your senses, the stuff that we use for fiction primarily, doesn't apply. So we're sort of stuck with painting with signs and symbols and our imagination, and learning to see the world in a very different way. Can you speak a little bit to what a sacred look is? Because that leads into the sacramental imagination.
Well, I was going to say that exactly. It does lead to a sacramental worldview. Well, taking a sacred look, I think, is bringing our understanding of a broader understanding of the liturgical and sacramental vision of the human person. So, not sacraments in the capital S of the Catholic Church, but of a sense of sacramentality, where we see God at work in everything in the world, in all of creation, in all of human interaction, on all that is authentically human, not what is dehumanizing, but what is authentically human can be a moment of grace and a moment where we can encounter the divine. And I think taking a sacred look really is, we're doing that from the sacramental vision. So recognizing how the symbols and signs of the culture and of the world are opportunities for us to encounter God. And we can see that, like, just think about, I don't know, like the water in Hunger Games, or I'm thinking that's the first movie that came to my mind. There's so many other movies, but even fire, how does it transforming? How does it change them? How does it renew them, the characters? Think about the I don't know. I'm just thinking of even superhero movies. The Avengers. Let's think about that. Like, think about Iron Man. Even at the end of Endgame, remember when he takes on from Thanos all the stones. He's not taking it just for himself, but he's taking it to transform and to save the other and all of the world. So he becomes a sacrificial lamb in some ways. Yeah. I mean, it's very symbolic, right? Of a sacrificing oneself. In the scriptures where Jesus is saying, the one who lays down his life for his friends. And in one way, that symbol, that symbol of sacrifice, when he removes and sacrifices himself, when he takes it away from Thanos, and realizing he's going to die because of it. Yeah. Of course, and probably next superhero, he's going to show up again alive. So, well, as they all do. But
multiverses, you can't keep them down. Darn it.
That's great. You can't keep them down. But think of all the symbolism that's in there. I mean, I'm a Star Wars fan. I love Star Wars. So there's so much in the Force that talks about, that we think about we can think about in relation to the spiritual life. Okay, it's not a perfect analogy. So we're not talking analogy, but we're talking about certain symbols that can be reflective of our own spiritual journey. And I think we need to think about that in that sense. It helps us to get a deeper vision, a deeper view of the story, and gives a depth of meaning, honestly. And when we create stories with those symbols, with that type of storytelling, whether people are aware of what those symbols mean or not in a religious sense, it is transforming. It is changing them. It is changing their vision, their understanding of the story. So I think
that line, you become what you love.
Right.
And the masses are in love with a lot of these stories that are, well, I mean, heroism for sure, but right relationship, right action in the world. it makes me think what you were just saying, talking about sacramentality for those who remember Sunday School 101, sacrament being the outward sign of an inward grace, meaning a kind of a sensory based experience of an invisible or an intangible reality. And you can think of maybe like a bell ringing. The bell is ringing because music is happening there. And that's
Right.
the indication that lets us know. And that's what sacraments do. And the mystic is the one who cultivates the sacred look, who doesn't just see, oh, a ringing bell. It's like, no, someone who sees music is happening there.
Right.
Music is expanding out into the environment, and it's using this thing to do it in connection with it. It's like inseparable from it. They're happening together, and that's what's
Right.
so beautiful about. So the sacramental imagination, you've got this wonderful line where you say, that which allows us to participate in this divine life of God is our very sacramental imagination. This is the way of viewing reality through the lens of faith, where the finite mediates the infinite, and all of creation can be a mediation of grace. And you go on to say what the sacramental imagination expresses is that sacramentality revolves around mediation. The non-material is mediated through the material. Sacraments are mediated through symbols. Transcendence is mediated through immanence, God the Father, mediated through the incarnate Son. That
Yeah.
was just powerful. And of course, you then extrapolate from that to movies and storytelling, right?
Right. Right. Oh gosh, yeah. Oh, like, when you read it like that, I'm like, wow, did I write that? I was like, yeah, that's exactly what sacramentality is. And I think there's so many stories and movies. Well, I think in movies it comes out so much more because of the visual sense, but it's also in music. But yeah, just think, I don't know, Terrence Malick is so unique, right, in his storytelling, and I think he uses symbolism so well.
Mm-hmm.
Um, A Hidden Life is beautiful. The story of Franz Jagerstatter and the symbolism of that idyllic life of his family. What a beautiful, sense of this in the mountains you feel. But then there's this rumbling that's happening, which is World War II. You see it in his other films like Tree of Life. Gosh, the whole sense of creation that's happening. You just see the movement of human beings and our life cycle in the midst of the bigger sense of creation and the forming of the universe. I mean, it's powerful. It's so powerful, and it gives it such a depth of meaning. A lot of
Mm-hmm.
people don't like certain films like that because they're very artistic. But I
Yeah.
think artists get it. Artists really see deeper.
Maybe it's not meant for everyone. Yeah.
Yeah, right. No,
Yeah.
not every movie is for everyone. No,
Mm-hmm.
definitely.
I like your there's this beautiful point as well. We'll start to wrap, I guess. You've got this lovely line. You say sacramental imagination is present in contemporary popular stories, perhaps unconsciously. And I want to ask you about that. How could it be unconscious? Through the seeking of salvation, redemption, purpose, meaning, hope, and through the use of everyday symbols to convey meaning. You then go on to say, despite the sinful tendencies of human beings to lie, kill, cheat, betray, and destroy, there is always a glimmer of hope in the soul that cannot be extinguished. And that goes back to my point earlier
Mhm.
that, well, you shared of the Holy Spirit is always moving through people and calling us, pulling us. And,
Right.
might not always get it right in every generation and every movie, but in
Right.
general, there's always this movement. Can you speak a little bit more to how can storytellers, well, I guess it's like cooking with ingredients. You choose the right
Right.
ingredients, or you just keep reusing good ingredients, and without intending, you might actually create something helpful and good.
Right. Well, I think it's sometimes, filmmakers. Um, I mean, a lot of filmmakers, it's very intentional what they want to do in their storytelling. But I think also in Catholic filmmakers, especially, even if they're not currently practicing their faith, I think this sense of sacramentality is very ingrained in their lives. I mean, just think of um, Alfonso Cuarón, in The Children of Men. I mean, it's present there. It's the story really of redemption, of the nativity set in a very dystopian world. But it's like the baby that they're trying to save is the one who will save humanity. It sounds
Mhm.
familiar, right?
Yeah.
Like Mary and Joseph running away from Herod. Okay, it's
Mhm.
the same kind of story. Cuaron, in his Mexican background, I mean, very Catholic background, I think is using these images and these symbols to really communicate something deeper, even about faith and about life. But I think a lot of times they may not be so intentional that it's religious, because whenever you show something that's a forgiveness between two human beings, that is transformative. That's redemptive. And they may not even thinking about that in a religious sense, but reconciliation and forgiveness
Yeah.
shows the depth of human beings for something more and the
Mhm.
greater good. Like
Mhm.
there is something more that's good in the human person
Yeah.
besides just showing everything that's evil. We know what's evil, and it's okay to show evil,
Mhm.
but there's possibility for change, and
Mhm.
that sometimes is not necessarily an intentionally religious moment.
Yeah. I think that, like what you're saying, it's not so much that we, as those who are gifted the understanding of the Christian witness, the Christian gospel. I won't say those who have it, because we're seeking it. That's why we're practicing it. So we've been gifted something in earthen vessels, and we're seeking it all our lives.
I,
We're not so much co-opting movies to just, find any conceivable possible bridge to just enjoy things and talk
right,
about things. Like, no, it's the other way around. It's like, in general,
right. I
uh,
had somebody tell me what's interesting, or not telling me, but I saw somebody wrote online about the series Mrs. Davis. I don't know if anybody's been
oh,
seeing
I
it.
haven't seen that yet. Is it good?
God, okay, it's about a nun.
Okay.
I think, like I said, Hollywood's fascinated with nuns. But this person who's grew up Catholic but has since gone away from faith in every way, wrote about that she actually, as a teenager, was discerning with the Daughters of St. Paul. She thought, and
Oh,
she
how
writes that in
funny.
this
Yeah.
article, and that the Daughters of St. Paul, how we work with media and how it was so interesting for her, and it still is.
Hmm.
But she moved away from the faith and she kind of like disses it completely. But she said this series, Mrs. Davis, is making her think about coming back to the faith.
Oh,
And
how
so, those who
funny.
don't know, it's a rather crazy sci-fi, thrilling, or action adventure. It's kind of a mix of all kinds of things. This series, and it's about a
Hmm.
nun
Hmm.
whose their monastery or their group gets disbanded because of, well, anyone, somebody. It's about an AI. Um, the AI kind of starts taking over and takes away their monastery. Anyway,
Hmm.
it's really bizarre. But they get the nun right. And every time, so there she is in her habit, and then she's on her motorcycle, and she knows she's great at, every kind of movement,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
with, defending herself. She's amazing. But every time people come to her and say, "Why are you wearing that dress or that outfit?" She goes, "It's not an outfit, it's a habit, and I choose to wear it." I was like, "Oh wow, okay, they got that right. Who told them that?"
Yeah, that
But
is fun. I've been
it
circling
really
that.
is
I need to
saying
give that a
something
watch.
interesting about religious life. Not that it's totally accurate, obviously. It's
Yeah.
it's more sci-fi and action adventure, but there
Hmm.
are some interesting elements about religious life that they get right. And I was actually rather impressed so far. But it's rather crass. Okay, for those who know
Well, they didn't make it
that.
for nuns.
Yeah.
But that's it. You're right. It is intriguing that there's, I think one of the benefits that's happening as of, well, this past decade is this cultivation of a greater sense of awareness
Yes.
of the other and a respect for the other and the other's traditions. And I think it goes overboard sometimes, and we're now figuring out how to redraw boundaries again. But one of the cool things that's happening is, like you just described, even in not parodies, maybe it's a parody, but funny stuff, they're taking time to actually understand that
Right.
something like a nun or a religious person might actually be making a positive choice for something, and not just a negative repression of
Right.
something else. So that's fascinating. I'm going to give that. That sounds like fun.
I mean, even like Better Call Saul or Breaking Bad. I mean,
Oh,
those
I
are
love
series
those.
are
Yeah, I just finished
incredibly
them.
crafted, like
Hmm.
in the symbolism in it. So you think about the
It's true.
opening shot of Better Call Saul. It's that opening shot tells it's a symbolic image, and
Hmm.
that whole thing tells the story of that episode.
Yeah,
Just
yeah,
that first shot, very creative. So
yeah.
so when you're attuned to the symbols and signs, you start realizing the deeper stories and the deeper
Hmm.
meaning in those stories. So
Yeah. It then does create some very real thought and interest about where the directors are coming from. Like
oh,
Christopher Nolan. I've been watching more of his stuff more
oh
recently.
yeah.
And my goodness, is this guy not only make incredible movies, but he does because he thinks incredibly deeply.
Yes, he
And
does.
we end up getting stuck at the first level of Inception, and he's busy working at other things.
Oh, I love
Person
Inception.
of Interest is another. Like
Yes.
you get to the end, you realize how deeply religious the whole thing is.
Yes.
That's fascinating. Okay, as we wrap, I'd like to talk about three characteristics of the Catholic imagination, because you end with communion as one, not just Holy
Mhm.
Eucharist, but uh,
Mhm.
building of community, building of the kingdom. Can you outline for us the three characteristics of the Catholic imagination?
Well, we talked about one. I mean, the sense of sacramentality. I mean, that's
Hmm.
very Catholic in how we see grace at work through the symbols and signs of everyday life, of everything in creation.
Hmm.
That's very specifically a Catholic worldview and a sacramental worldview.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah,
how
yeah.
God mediates his presence to us through the tangible and through the concrete things of this earth and this world. So it's really important that we see that. I think another aspect of the Catholic imagination is mediation. I was just talking about that, and you mentioned this that mediation. That's part of a sacramental worldview too, actually, because unless we see how God is mediates His presence to us through the tangible, we'll never understand God working in this world. We're going to think of God more as this supreme being overlooking us on this earth with little
Yeah,
human
yeah,
beings
yeah.
that we
Clash
are.
of Titans, Zeus far away
Right.
watching. Well, unfortunately, most of us
Exactly.
think of religion that way. And that's why a lot of
Right.
atheists walk away, is because that is obviously, and we should agree with them, that is not it. But we think it
No,
is.
God is intimately connected with
Yeah.
us in everything of our lives and in every aspect of our lives. And that's why Christ is mediate. God's presence mediated through Christ to us on through the incarnation, and He shows us how everything of humanity, the best of humanity, and all of creation can be the work of grace for us, can be the presence of God for us, and then He
Mhm.
does that in beautifully. In so many directors do that. Amazing. I mean, most of what Martin Scorsese does, whether you like his films or not, it shows a lot of mediation and a sacramental vision. Um, and we may not like his outcome, and that's fine. It's nothing's perfect, but yet at the same time, it does give us a deeper vision into the culture and into the world. The third characteristic would be communion, right? We have to realize that we're redeemed, not just individually, but as a community, a communion of human beings. Christ came to redeem all of humanity, not just us
Mhm.
individually. And I think so much when we look at stories and of culture, um, the best bring us to recognize we are part of a human family. The best
Mhm.
make us realize that we're part of a community. And Catholic imagery kind of brings us to that sense of community.
Mhm.
I mean, just look at the liturgy. The liturgy is about coming together in communion,
Mhm.
and that's why we can't just do it online. We need to come together not only to receive the body and blood of Christ in communion, but
Yeah.
we need one another physically present to
Right.
share in this worship of God in Christ.
Mhm.
We need one another. I think that comes out a lot in different stories, and I'm actually trying to think of some stories, like in Calvary. Oh, John Michael McDonough's story, Calvary. I mean, even in Banshees of Inisherin, which is his brother, who's a director, uh, they really talk about the need for that for one another in the village. I mean,
Hmm.
and why do we keep each other? They keep like finding out about each other's business. Well, it's you can Brendan Gleeson's character wants to like live alone and without anybody, without being interrupted by anyone else, and it's like, but that doesn't really happen. That's
Hmm.
not really being human, because
Hmm.
we are social beings
Yeah.
needing one another. And in
Hmm.
the end they realize he does, he needs other human beings.
Hmm.
um anyway, that's just some three ways that we can really have a Catholic
Hmm.
imagination, a Catholic perspective
Yeah.
on the stories of the culture.
Yep. And so just to recap, you said there's the sacred look, there's the seeing of the good, the seeing of God
Yeah.
within, things, within everything, people. Then there's mediation, which is
Mhm.
communicating, transmitting that
Mhm.
goodness, that godness. And the third is the celebration or the cultivation, curation of
Right.
community
Yeah.
around that. And what I think is wonderful about this is that it's when we say it's the Catholic imagination, we're not talking about, well, this is a particular religious label. It's like, no, this is Catholic in the universal sense. This is
Mhm.
this is just reality, desperately trying to be all of reality, everything,
Right.
everywhere, all at once. Which I need to see that movie too. But all of reality, not just a part of it. And
Right.
it's a messy thing and it's a human thing. And that's
Yeah.
what I've come to appreciate in just filling myself with watching tons and tons of movies, is begin to realize I may not like certain outcomes, like we've just
Right.
discussed, but then it's not up to me. Somebody else's story and somebody else's journey in their life is also not up to me. And
Mhm.
I may not like where I end up. And maybe I need to, watch somebody else's story to get a sense of the outcomes, to get a fresh sense of what I'm doing with my own life, which ultimately I think is the whole point of
Right.
every story anyway.
Right.
So,
Exactly. And I think what you're saying about, it's not going to be perfect. Like we like happy endings, and that's very American storytelling. We want to know a happy ending and we want to feel good afterwards. But a
yeah.
lot of like foreign films don't go that direction. They leave you
Hmm.
kind of disturbed. They leave you kind of like, ugh, with angst.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
maybe, and sometimes that's a thing for us to reflect on as well,
Yeah.
because
Absolutely.
life isn't perfect happy endings.
Hmm.
Life is messy. Life, I mean, sin, the
Hmm.
original sin makes life messy.
Yeah.
We're not perfect.
Yep.
We strive to grow in perfection, but we're not there yet.
Mhm.
But it's okay to have happy endings too, because I gotta say that I mean I like happy endings.
I
I
think
love
that
Jane Austen, so
all
okay,
stories can be lined along or put in a line depending on a
right,
level of spiritual growth or a
right,
spiritual need. And some stories are about anti-heroes who might end with like
right.
a 1%, maybe this isn't a good idea. It doesn't show a full conversion, but I think we need stories for every single phase and stage of
Yes,
the conversion, the
exactly,
growth process. So,
exactly.
sister,
There's
thanks
something
for
out there
coming
for
on.
everyone.
Well, there needs to be. Thank you, sister, for coming on. This was fun, friends. If you enjoyed this and this was helpful, please hit that like button. It's going to help more people to discover this video, to hear more about sister's book. And sister, where can people grab a copy if they want a copy of this
Right
book?
here. This is it. And they can get it from paulinestore.com and look up A Sacred Look Becoming Cultural Mystics.
There you go. Or Google A Sacred Look, Sister Nancy. So thank you, friends. Hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Hope if you're a writer, hope you keep writing, and come and check us out at legendfiction.com. It's a community for Catholic and Orthodox fiction writers, a place to give and get feedback, share your works in progress, and maybe double or triple your writing output, because we're all having so much fun. Sister, I would love to have you back. Thank you so much for coming on today.
God bless you. Thanks so much.